Here I have been asked to solve an application problem. The problem states that the diagonal of a TV set is 26 inches long. Its length is 14 inches more than the height. Find the dimensions of the TV set. The first thing I would do here is draw a picture. So we'd have, let's assume, some sort of rectangular TV set. It told us that the length of the diagonal was 26 inches. So I'll go ahead and label that. Now, it tells us something about the length. It says that the length is 14 inches more than the height. So I don't know anything about the height, so I'm going to let the height be x. Then, since the length is 14 inches more, I would label the length x plus 14. Always let your variable be the piece you know nothing about, which in this case was height, and then you're able to label the other one based on that x value. For this problem, we need to know some background information, and that is Pythagorean theorem. Pythagorean theorem says that if you have a right triangle and we label the sides A, B, and C, with the hypotenuse being C, that A squared plus B squared is equal to C squared. So this is background information that we need to know. Now, we can see how this would apply to this problem. We see that we have a right triangle here. Our hypotenuse would be 26, and then our legs, the A and the B, are the x and the x plus 14. And so we can create a formula from this by saying that x squared plus x plus 14 squared would equal 26 squared. Where A and B are don't make a difference as long as they're on the left-hand side of the equation. The thing that makes the most difference is the 26 being the hypotenuse, and so that has to be on the right-hand side of your equation. Okay, so now we have an equation that we can solve. They're wanting to know the dimensions, which means they need to know what the height and the length is. If we can solve for x, then that would be the height, and certainly if we have the height, we can compute the length. Okay, so this equation needs to now be solved for x. Well, x squared is just going to stay x squared. This means write that factor twice. So it would be x plus 14 times x plus 14. Now this is an application type problem. So a lot of times on this particular problem you'll end up with big numbers, so this would be on the calculator part of an exam. We can see here we need to do 26 squared on the right hand side, so I'll do that on my calculator. That result is 676. Right now, we now want to FOIL these two factors on the left side. The x squared would stay, and then we want to multiply out the two binomials. You would first multiply x times x, you'd have x squared. Then multiply x times 14 on the outside, so you'd have 14x. Multiply 14 times x on the inside, that would be another 14x. And then multiply 14 times 14 times 14. So 14 times 14 is 196. And then we'd still have equal 676 on the right side. From here, you want to combine like terms. We have an x squared and an x squared, so that would be 2x squared. A 14x and a 14x, so that would be 28x. And then a 196. The 676 you have on the right side needs to be moved over to the left so that you can get 0 on the right side. It moving to the left means it would be subtracted over. So you'd subtract that over and then you'd have 0 left on the right side. Okay, go ahead and combine your 196 and your negative 676. So 2x squared plus 28x. And you can do this on your calculator. 196 minus 676 results in negative 480, and then equals 0. Now, there's different ways to solve quadratic equations. One way we know is to factor, and I'm actually going to try that first because I see that each term on the left-hand side shares a factor of 2. So I'm going to factor out a 2 first. Doing that, I would have an x squared left as the first term, a 14x left as the middle term, and then a negative 240 left as the last term, and then still equals 0. If I want to continue with my factoring, then I would then want to factor what's left on the inside. It's a trinomial, so it would likely factor as 2 binomials. I need an x and an x to give me x squared, and then I want to look for factors of negative 240 that add or subtract to positive 14. Well, I know that negative 24 and 10 would multiply to negative 240. I'm going to go ahead and put the numbers but without the signs. Alright, if I do that and then check myself, this would be 24x and this would be 10x. To determine if it needs to be negative 24 and positive 10 or vice versa, I see that I want the values to multiply to a positive 14. That would mean that the 24 needs to be positive and the 10 needs to be negative. So I'd actually put a plus 24 and a negative 10. Okay? I know that the middle two values combine to give me positive 14x, so that's correct. I also know that when I multiply the first two terms, I get x squared, and then when I multiply the last two terms, that gives me negative 240. So I have the correct factorization. Once I have factored, I then want to solve. Recall that if you have a constant that does not have a variable with it, you don't have to do anything with that constant. At this point, you would set your x plus 24 equal to 0, and your x minus 10 equals to 0. Subtract 24, and so this would yield x is negative 24. Add over 10, and this would yield x is 10. Now remember what the question was asking. In this situation, it wanted me to find the dimensions of my TV set. Well, in this particular case, we see that our x represents the height. Below, one of our answers was x is negative 24. That's not possible because I can't have a negative height. So you want to eliminate that answer. All right, x is equal to 10. That's a fine answer. So going back to my picture above, I had the diagonal being 26 inches long, the height being x, and then the length being x plus 14. So my dimensions are going to be a height of 10, and then be sure to look for the units. This particular problem gave your units in inches, so this would be inches. And then a length, it says here that our length is 14 inches more than our height. So if x is 10, then our length would be 10 plus 14, which is 24. So 24 inches. One thing to be careful about, the 24 that we got for the length had nothing to do with this negative 24 that we got up above. So there's no relationship between the 24 that was our length and the 24 that we got that was negative. Okay, our answer strictly came from the x is 10 part, and then we were adding the 14 to get our 24.